How to set up your fighting rifle practically. That's what we're going to talk about today on Gunfighter Life, where we talk about guns, gunfighting, tactics, ballistics, use of force, the right way, with Almighty God at the center, Judeo-Christian values, and real-world first-hand experience. On that experience I've been blessed with, why should you care what I have to say about guns at all or fighting rifles? Not because I have a microphone, not because I have a podcast. I'll roll into a quick abbreviated bio and then into the main topic. First and foremost, I am a Christian. I don't apologize for that. God is number one in my life. I grew up hunting and fishing in the backwoods of the southeastern United States at a very early age. Some of my earliest memories are with firearms. I joined the Marine Corps at 17, did a couple of combat tours in Iraq. By God's grace, He got me through that safely. After that, I served as an instructor, an urban warfare instructor and a desert warfare instructor for the United States Marine Corps. I also served with the LAPD, both full-time as a sworn police officer and some more specialized assignments, as well as serving in the U.S. Army, full-time and part-time National Guard. I've been a FBI firearms instructor, still am an FBI firearms instructor, have been for a lot of years, also NRA certified and some other three-letter government agency certified. I have been in the past a private contractor for the federal government, advanced weapons instructor, and am currently a private security contractor working in conjunction with several three-letter government agencies. I've been the commander of a tactical team in a large metropolitan area. By God's grace, He got me through all that in one piece, not because I'm better, but because He chose to have grace and mercy on me. I've been a professional hunter and guide. Professionally hunted things like buffalo and elk. Not many people today can say they've done that, but I'm blessed to be able to say that I have. I've hunted everything from white-tailed deer on the East Coast to mule deer on the West Coast to gray squirrel on the East Coast to prairie dog on the West Coast and elk and bear and wolf and slain all manner of beast. A state rifle and pistol champion a few times over in a few different disciplines. Now those experiences, it's not because I'm bigger or badder. Certainly not bigger. In fact, I met one of the patrons in real life, and he said something to the effect of, "I thought you'd be bigger." Reminded me of that William Wallace movie, where he's like, "Oh yeah, if William Wallace were here, he'd shoot lightning bolts out of his rear end." Well, I'm not William Wallace, but I am the person that did all those things in the bio. But not because I'm bigger or badder. I don't think that I survived when many other young good men did not. I give all the glory and all the credit to God, all the talents and experiences that He's given me and the things that He's let me live through. I hope to use them to glorify God and to help you today. So if I boast in anything, it's not in my strength, it's in that God had mercy on me and saved me because He had a purpose for me. And hopefully I can use those talent, skills, and abilities to serve you today. So you've got this new rifle, this new MSR, modern sporting rifle, assault rifle. Let's be real. Let's not fall into this Orwellian newspeak and let people redefine words. There's nothing wrong with assaulting something if it needs to be assaulted. Somebody's breaking into your house to kill your wife, you probably want to assault them. Or you can sit back, suck your thumb, and wait 15 to 45 minutes for the cops to show up. Assault is not a bad term. So I'm going to call them and refer to them as assault or quasi-assault rifles. Yeah, I know they're not full auto. I've shot more full auto than I care to remember. Full auto is mostly useless in most shoulder-fired rifles. I'm just going to throw that out there. If you want it to be effective, put it on a bipod or a tripod or a vehicle mount. Assault rifles. Modern sporting rifles. Went down a rabbit hole there. Shoulder-fired, box magazine fed, semi-auto, sustainable rate of fire rifles. Once you have it, how do you set it up? Now, two things got me thinking about this. One, I'm going to be honest, was that I got a new rifle. Blessed with a new rifle, and I was setting it up, and things that I take for granted, things that I've learned over decades of shooting. Wow, and at this point, decades of gunfighting experience. I just take it for granted that you know this, and a lot of people don't. I know that because I was recently teaching some new people how to shoot, and some, what I would consider, I think, fairly liberal people, which I'm blessed to be able to teach those guys how to shoot. It's their right to be armed, just like it's your right to be armed. The Second Amendment does not see political parties. And they brought out some of their guns, and I just looked at some that I would just shake my head. And they don't know what they don't know, right? It's not their fault. And I would imagine many people are in the same boat. I've worked at gun shops where I was employed as a gunsmith, and a lot of that was fixing these kind of rifles that people set up poorly. So with that long preamble, how does one actually do this? So I'm going to try and take you kind of step by step. You've got this new rifle. Men, I'm going to tell you something you probably don't want to hear. Read. I like reading. I like being well read. I don't particularly like reading manuals. As a man, I'm like, probably know that. Read the manual. I've had more fighting rifles on my hands than I can remember, especially AR-type rifles. I just got a new similar rifle, and I thought I know what's up here. I know what time it is. I know how to work an AR-type rifle. Well, this one had a adjustable gas system, and I figured, it's probably set where it should be for most things from the factory. Well, it wasn't. I should have read the manual. Even I'm not above this, right? Read the manual. The next one, you got a brand new rifle. Squeaky clean, right? Ready to go. Wrong. Clean your new gun. At least I didn't make this mistake. Clean your new gun. One, you get to know it, how it works. Two, don't assume just because it's brand new from the factory, everything is okay on it. Sometimes they can forget to cut rifling into barrels. Yeah. Sometimes they can be missing parts. Sometimes there could be machining metal and things like that in critical parts of the gun, the barrel, the action, just from machining and making the gun, that you might damage your gun if you just shoot it. Just because you got it from the factory doesn't mean that you don't have to clean it. And most manufacturers, all that I'm aware of, at least handguns, test fire their guns. Rifles, maybe. Guns, I think there's 1 or 2 states that require it. So the guns are already probably been shot. And if you care about barrel break-in, which we may or may not get into, clean your rifle, right? If you're coming here for advice, which you probably are if you're listening, you got a brand new rifle. I know you want to just take it out and go pew, 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 clink, clink, clink. It's fun, but clean your rifle. Clean your new rifle before you shoot it. Don't assume that it's cleaned and lubed and ready to go. Now this, real briefly, I'm not going to make this a whole thing on gun maintenance. I recently did one of those for the patrons. But on the fine moving parts, some kind of fine oil. And I'm not sponsored by anybody, right? Use Rem oil, use Lucas, whatever on, fine lubricant on the fine moving parts like trigger groups and things like that, on big moving parts like the giant massive bolt that is on a SCAR 17 or the bolt carrier group on an AR-15. Use thicker, more viscous lubricant like a grease or something like that if you plan on running it hard. If you plan on shooting it very little in a very austere environment, you might consider something like dry lube. But in general, light oil on the fine moving parts and thicker grease or thicker, more viscous oil on the bigger, heavier, slamming back and forth type parts. And let your gun talk to you after you shot it a little bit. Take it apart and look, and you'll see where the metal is getting worn. That is probably where you want more lubricant. And again, if you are going to shoot it a lot, run it like that. If you're going to shoot it a little bit and store it in an austere environment with dust and dirt and blood and stuff like that, you may want to run less lube on it. But when it goes to shooting and training, which you should be doing to set up your rifle, run it wet is my advice. Obviously test it later to make sure it runs dry, but clean it and lube it before you shoot it. The next one. Do I get a LPVO? Do I get a red dot? Do I get a prism sight? Do I get a magnifier? What about a holographic? Is that too retro for me in my life? Iron sights first. Iron sights. This is a fighting rifle. This is not a hashtag me too, look at me, I have an AR. If this is a fighting rifle, put iron sights on it. End of sentence. Iron sights. You can do straight flip-up iron sights if this is not your primary. If your primary sighting system is going to be iron sights, I suggest you get a well-proven, like A2 through A4 fixed and pinned front sight post if you want the most rugged, best go-to iron sight. If that's going to be your primary, go with that. And you might even want to consider an old school A1 or A2 type, but at least a good flat top with a good bolt-on adjustable carry handle type sight. If irons are not going to be your primary, they're going to be a secondary or a backup, buoys, backup iron sights, BUIS, then flip-ups. Magpoles are your standard, and again, I'm not sponsored. Magpoles are good, Troy's are good, Yankee Hill machines are good, but flip-up iron sights. You want to put those on. You want to use blue Loctite. You want to use a torque wrench, or don't over-tighten them. If you really know what you're doing and you really are tactily sound, you've done a lot of gunsmithing work, that's fine, but don't over-tighten them. Put blue Loctite on it. Don't be stingy with the blue Loctite. And then zero. If you just have them on there because it looks cool when I said to have them on there and they're not zeroed, bro, what are you doing? The fact that they're there is not going to help you. The point of the sights is to hit what you're aiming at. They need to be zeroed. Pick a zero for your iron sights. I don't care. I like a 50-yard zero for most things, but 50-yard, 25-yard, 36-yard, probably not a 100-yard zero for a fighting rifle. I know a lot of people love the 100-yard zero, but inch high to 100 is good if you're hunting on the East Coast over a corn pile out of a deer stand with a bolt-action rifle. Nothing wrong with that. If you're talking about a fighting rifle, I prefer a 50, but a 25 arguable, 36 if you know what you're doing. Pick a zero, zero your iron sights. In general, I'm going to say if you're going to run a red dot, I like a true co-witness. Iron sights. If you are going to, you might like the lower 1/3. I don't like them. It's fine if you want a lower 1/3. The reason I like the true co-witness is that I can tell if either my iron sights or my red dot has gotten knocked off plumb, off the true line. I can just look and tell. Like before a mission, if I'm doing a pre-mission inspection, PMIs, then I can look and tell, oh, hey, my red dot's off. I need to zero that thing or just take it off and use the iron sights. Or my red dot looks good. My iron sights are askew, right? I like the true co-witness for that. That's important to me. If you want 1/3, that's fine. With that, if you're going to run an LPVO, you can't do that because no matter how much the LPVO says it's 1X, it's probably not a true 1X. I'm just letting you know, you generally can't. I don't know of any LPVO where you can co-witness with your iron sights. So for that, since you can't do that anyway, you either run a QD setting or a quasi-QD setting on your LPVO with your straight regular flip-up iron sights, or you run a 45-degree offset. I like a 45-degree offset if I'm going to run an LPVO on a go-to general-purpose fighting rifle because I can use either or. I can run the gun. If something happens with my optic, I can flip it over real quick and still keep engaging the target without breaking contact at my 45 degrees. So I like 45-degree irons if I'm running an LPVO like that. In general, there are some exceptions. Like a Scar 17 comes with its own backup iron sights, and they're really good. I'm just talking about irons. I'm not even talking about what kind of optics you should run. That's later. Next, load development. And looking down, we're already at 14 minutes and some change. Probably going to break this up into different episodes. Load development. You know what? I am going to mention load development, and then I'm going to do it in a different episode. So make sure you're subscribed to the podcast. Or if you want it all at once, become a patron. Patrons are going to get this all in one early and ad free. So if you want to early become a patron, at least if you want the rest of the information, subscribe. Now I'm going to do it before I go to optics and load development because you may be on a bit of a budget. If you're trying to get set up, if you have good iron sights, even if they're like the flip up Magpul iron sights, they'll be fine for now. I suggest if you're not a good iron sight shooter, you get there before you even worry about putting an optic on it. You can shoot good with iron sights, you'll probably shoot better with an optic. The reverse is not true. So get those optics on, or get those irons on there, zero them, have fun shooting them at least for a bit. We'll come back to optics and load development later. But for now, with your irons, pick a pretty standard vanilla load. Call it a Walmart load. Something you can get easily and train with. You probably shouldn't be carrying this as a fighting rifle until you train with it. Take a class with it, go to a competition with it. If you've already done that and you know what to run through, what drills to run through, at least run some drills through it. Make sure it's good to go. Pick a pretty vanilla load for now, and we'll come back to the load development later. What about other stuff? More is more until it's less. Let me explain that. More is more until it's less. There are some really decent force multipliers on a modern fighting rifle. A white light. A white light is a force multiplier. And trust me, I've run nods. I've had the crazy, crazy expensive thermals and all that stuff. For most people, for most things, even for most gunfighters, a white light is your best bet. It's simple. It's easy. A white light. A simple, fairly lightweight white light. If we're talking about a fighting rifle, you want to keep it lightweight, but a good, functional white light. You're going to have to play around with this. I don't like pressure switches. Lots of people do. I like simpler is better. I like just a button on the light. I like a simple on-off. I don't like strobe. I like a simple attachment to a rail. Most of these modern rifles are going to be able to change the position on it, whether it be M-lock or just a rail, which side you want it on. If you want it on an offset, you can usually get a 45-degree offset mount. Figure out how you like it. Do you like it at 6 o'clock? Do you like it at 3 o'clock? Do you like it at 9 o'clock? Pick your o'clock. Practice with it. If something is interfering, maybe run at a different place. But a white light is a force multiplier. I suggest you get a white light. I also suggest that you get a good sling. If it's a fighting rifle, it should have a sling. Get a two-piece sling unless you have a really good reason otherwise. Get a two-piece sling unless you have a really good reason otherwise. A good two-piece sling doesn't have to be crazy expensive. Caveat to that, if it's going to spend most of its time in a bag, like a truck gun or something like that, a laptop bag gun, if it's going to spend most of its time in a bag and you're just going to grab it and throw it on really quickly, you still should have a sling. Mostly so somebody doesn't grab your gun out of your hands and shoot you with your own rifle. That's a bad day. For that, a single point sling will work. I don't like single point slings as much, but they have their place for a light, handy gun like that that's going to live in a bag with a strap, where if you're carrying it, you're carrying it in the bag, not the rifle on your body. And if you grab it to use it, you throw the single point sling over so somebody doesn't shoot you with your own gun. If you got to drop the rifle to throw on a tourniquet yourself or somebody else, then the rifle hangs there. It doesn't just fall to the ground and somebody else grabs it. Single point slings are okay for that. But in general, a 2-point sling. Get a good 2-point sling. And that's pretty much it for your other accessories. You can upgrade stuff later, like a trigger, right? But kind of like the iron sights, if it's got a mil-spec trigger, if you guys have listened for any length of time, I kind of feel about those how I feel about a Glock trigger. Slightly better. I feel slightly better about a mil-spec AR trigger than a Glock trigger, but you can do better, But again, like the iron sights, if you can shoot good with a garbage mil-spec trigger, and I think you can, I qualified with iron sights with a garbage mil-spec trigger with an M16A2 that looked like it got drugged behind a truck, was rattly and nasty. Who knows how old it was when I got it. I qualified expert, shooting man-sized targets with iron sights at 500 yards, 550 yards, 500 meters, with iron sights, no support, no artificial rest, with that garbage mil-spec trigger. You can do good work with it. My advice is run it with the trigger that it came with unless you absolutely already know what trigger you want. Keep the backup in your line kit, which we'll get into later, but if you do want to upgrade your trigger later, that's fine. If you already know, like I know that I like a flat-faced single-stage trigger. Cool. Then you already know that. But if you don't know that, run it with the mil-spec trigger for a while until you figure out what you want. Probably don't go with an uber lightweight trigger if this is your first rodeo on a fighting rifle. But you might want to upgrade that later. Don't go crazy with the accessories. Try and keep your... Lighter is better for a lot of things, but try and keep it in the 9-ish pound range. Right? Don't turn this into some giant obese abomination that looks cool on a bench, but when you have to hoof it or run, you don't want to carry it, right? Keep it light and handy. 6 to 9-ish pounds. I like lighter, but 6 to 9-ish pounds. I'm talking about with the accessories, with all the stuff we talked about, and the optic, which will come later. Try and keep it in that weight range. With that, guys, if you liked this episode, again, make sure you subscribe. The next episode, I'm going to get into optics and load development and line gear, meaning like go-to support gear you might want to consider for your rifle to keep it running. With that, your tactical tip of the day, one of the things I don't like about the AR pattern direct impingement rifles is they are nasty. They run nasty. They run dirty. They're a pain in the butt to clean. They got all these little teeny nooks and crannies that are a pain in the butt to clean. Hot, soapy water is one of the things recommended for military guns. It works. As long as you don't live in some crazy, salty, humid environment, hot, soapy water, make sure the gun stays disassembled and you let it dry before you reassemble it. Make sure it's dry before you lube it and reassemble it. But hot soapy water is cheap, effective. Something like a toothbrush and Dawn dish soap, hot soapy water, absolutely is a good, cheap, effective way to clean a lot of that rifle. Not all of it. Like, you're still going to want some solvent and stuff for the barrel for some of the nastier carbon places, but hot soapy water is pretty good. So there is that tactical tip. Your tactical verse of the day from the prophet Ezekiel. So then, son of man, prophesy, and strike your hands together. Let the sword strike twice, even 3 times. It is a sword for slaughter, a sword for great slaughter, closing in on them from every side. Postscript. P.S. guys, this is already well over an hour of content with the part 1 and part 2. Instead of doing an entire other part 3, because some people don't care about fighting rifles. They want to hear about hunting rifles or handguns or whatever. I'm going to keep it in 2 parts. I'm going to add this. This is content on zeroing. I'm going to put this in the PS. I'm going to add it to episode number 1, zeroing your weapon. Make sure you're subscribed so you get the next installment. Again, unless you want to become a patron and get it all early and ad-free. Let's talk about zeroing your gun. Sighting in your weapon. Your whatever it is. Most likely a rifle, but you could also use this for a pistol or a shotgun. Whatever applies. Number 1. The number 1 thing that I have on my checklist. And yes, I have a sighting in checklist. Pray. Right? If you want a good outcome in anything, you should first pray about it. Because all good things come from God. Some things you're also going to want, eyes and ears, the firearm, that goes without saying, I guess. The ammo, I'd say at least 40 rounds. That's if a center fire rifle, at least 2 full boxes. Don't get almost sighted in and then not have enough ammo. Now, it shouldn't take that long, but I've sighted in enough rifles to know that sometimes it does. Some kind of proper rest, a lead sled, a bag of shot, whatever that is for you. Good targets. I can't emphasize that enough. Good targets, preferably with some kind of square that are denoted in inches, because here in America we like to do things in inches, and a lot of the clicks on your optic, assuming you're using an optic, are going to be denoted in inches. For instance, quarter MOA clicks, which would equal a quarter inch roughly at 100 yards. Cleaning equipment, which you may or may not use, but you should probably have it. And then padding. Why padding? Well, depending on the caliber, you might want it for your shoulder. And also, even if you don't need it for the recoil management, it might come in handy to stop your heartbeat from interfering with the rifle moving. Let me start by saying I almost always zero my weapons at 50 yards. Almost always 50 yard zero. And this is not easy to do in audio only, but bullets never rise above the bore line. You can look at charts and you see them going up, and you think that means that they're rising. They're rising in relation to the earth because the barrel is pointed up away from the earth. You shot a laser outside the bore of that rifle going straight, that bullet is only ever going to drop from that line. The bullet goes up because you point it up. It still falls in relation to that bore line. Now, the sights are mounted above the barrel. If it's like a traditional rifle, let's say a Ruger 1022, they're very close to the barrel. If it's something like an AR with that inline buffer tube, the sights are mounted much higher than the barrel. This is something called height over bore. We might come back to that later. But for now, just realize that the sights are above the barrel, right? If you looked directly through those sights and those sights were directly in line with that bore, the barrel, if the sights and the barrel were directly in line, they would never cross, right? You would never ever shoot where you were aiming. They would always be lower, and they would just get lower and lower the further that bullet went down range. If that's an AR where the sights are, let's just say for the M16, 2.6 inches. You'd shoot 2.6 inches low at point blank range right in front of the muzzle, and it would only go lower and lower from there. Because of that, and I know that light is affected by gravity. You know, we learned that in Einstein's theory of relativity. But for the sake of argument, without getting super nerdy, as far as we're concerned and ranges that we can see, our vision, our line of sight, is not affected by gravity. But the bullet very much is. So what we want is to aim that bore up into the sights so that it crosses our line of sight as we're looking through those sights, so that it crosses. So if you think about this, your vision, your line of sight to those sights is a straight line to infinity. Again, gravity does affect light, but for this intents and purposes, it doesn't really practically. So you're looking in a straight line. That bullet is going to arch up and cross your line of sight once, and then it's going to cross it again. Real common one for the full-size M16, I think, is 36 yards. So it's going to cross it at 36 and then again at 300. And that's going to give your 300-meter BZO. For the M4, it might be 25 meters or whatever. And get you on again at 300. You could zero your weapon at 25 meters if you want. You could zero it at 36 meters if you want. I like zeroing almost all my weapons at 3. I prefer a 50-yard zero. 50 yards, that's the first time my bullet is going to cross over that line of sight. And this varies from weapon to weapon. Like my Scar 17, I think it crosses it again right at about 220 yards. Which means that my max ordnance, the point that bullet's the highest in that arc, where it crosses the first time and it gets higher and higher, and then it comes back down on that same line. It'll cross it once at 50 and once at 220. Now, if I wanted a longer point blank range, if I wanted to push back where that second point was, I could make the first point closer because it's going to give me a higher arc, if that makes sense. If it crossed, and I'm just doing this out of my head, if I crossed that at 25 meters, it might not cross again until 275 meters. That being said, I like the 50. generally referred to as 50, 250, 0. You shoot 0 at 50 and you'll be back on again somewhere around 250. Again, my SCAR is 220. Really depends on the rifle that you're shooting and the ammo and all different things. But I like that because the max ordnance is not too high, right? You're not getting too high above the bore line. You do you zero for the distance that you want, but if you're looking here for wisdom and my recommendation, it's 50 meters. And why 50 meters on everything? Because I shoot a lot of different guns, I train on a lot of different guns, and I teach people that shoot a lot of different guns. And 50 is the best all around. Then I don't have to wonder, what is this rifle sighted in for? What is this handgun? Yes, I sight my handguns in. Yes, I zero my handguns at 50 yards as well. They're all sighted in 50 yards. I know that. You might say, well, why not sight them in for the longer distance? Why not sight them in at 200 yards or 250 yards? And I said there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, you're probably more accurate at that distance. It gives you a better idea of the actual zero of that gun at that distance. However, if you're talking about a tactical rifle or a hunting rifle, it's a lot easier to find a 50-yard range than it is to find a 250-yard range, especially, let's say, east of the Mississippi or wherever you're going to go hunting. You can usually find a 50-meter range, a 50-yard range. Finding a 250-yard range, not so easy. And if not that TSA would ever do this, but if they dropped your gun, your gun case got beat up in transit or whatever, you have to confirm zero, and you should confirm zero anyway. It's a lot easier to confirm zero and find a 50-yard range than a 250-yard range. That's the reason I can't think of a rifle or a pistol that I have, or shotgun that I have that's not zeroed for that. Actually, my 20 gauge I think is zeroed at 25 meters. But almost everything that I have, there's an exception to everything, right? Almost every gun that I have is zeroed at 50 meters. Also makes it easy if I'm taking a couple of guns out to make sure they're still zeroed. My wife and I just did a trip across the country. I want to go out and confirm zero on a couple of rifles. I set up one target at 50 meters, or I set up one target stand at 50 meters and put up 3 or 4 different targets. And make sure my SCAR and my go-to AR and my handgun are all good to go, right? Anyway, I like a 50-yard zero, even on a hunting rifle. I know the old school way of thinking was 100 meters, and I've had that I worked for insist on 100-yard zero, and I'll do what they want, right, if they're the boss. But when I went to be a professional hunter and guide, the place that I went, long before I got there, they zeroed their guys at 50 yards, and I was thankful to see that. The old adage used to be an inch high at 100. Well, you know what? If you look at most practical rifles and you're zero at 50, it's pretty close to an inch high at 100. There's a reason for that old adage. It gives you the best shootability at practical hunting ranges. You're only going to be, out at 25 meters or 20 meters. The closest you're probably going to shoot a big game animal. Now, there are exceptions. You could get them really close, especially dangerous game. You're talking an inch or two difference. So you'll be an inch or two low there. You'll be dead on at 50. You'll be an inch and a half high at 100, 125, wherever your max ord is. And dead on again at 220, 250, whatever that is, depending on your cartridge and your rifle. But they're surprisingly similar. No matter what marketing would have you believe, inside 250 yards, for most modern rifle cartridges, they're dramatically similar. And the vast, vast majority of any big game animal is taken inside of 250 yards. So if I zero at 50, I can pretty much do that point blank. If you don't know, point blank range means I can just put the front sight of the reticle on the target, and I don't have to adjust for anything, pull the trigger, and if I apply all my fundamentals right, then that meat goes from on the hoof to on my fork, or on somebody's fork, or whatever the case is. If you're shooting a coyote, probably not, right? But you get the idea. That's the point blank range. I can point at it and hit it without having to do any adjustments, any kind of clicking on a scope or anything like that. I like the 50-yard zero. Again, you want to choose a different one? Go ahead. That's totally fine. I'm going to go through the process, or some of the parts of the process of zeroing a rifle. You get your rifle, you take it out, you set it on the table, the bench, whatever. Check your mounts. Make sure they're solid. Make sure they're Loctited. If they're not, just put Loctite on them now. It's going to give you a lot less headache than if they come loose later. Just did an episode called Little Things. Don't buy a super expensive scope and a super expensive rifle and skimp on the 25 cents per screw of Loctite that you need to put on there. Blue Loctite, not red. I've learned that the hard way. But blue Loctite, well worth the money. Check your eye relief. If you're with somebody and they don't really know what they're doing, check their eye relief. You don't want them shooting that 30-06 with their eye, a half inch back from the scope. That's going to be a bad day. Just look at your buddy and laugh at him when he gets a cut on his eye. That's not cool. Make sure your eye relief is good. Make sure if the person didn't know what they were doing setting up that scope, or you don't know what you're doing, you know how to set for eye relief. You need to set the proper eye relief for that scope. If not, you're going to see a bunch of black in that scope, or you're going to get hit in the face with the scope. So set that proper eye relief. Check the scope reticle focus and parallax. Make sure that's good. It's going to be hard to sight in if your reticle is not crystal clear, right? Take out your Sharpie or a pencil or that paint marker and mark the rings and the bases before you start shooting. Mark the screws, make sure they don't turn. Mark the bases and the scope, make sure they're not moving around. If somebody doesn't know what they're doing mounting a scope, a lot of times see stuff in there shift. You're never going to get a good zero if stuff in there is moving around. This is not really a scope mounting episode, so I don't want to go into that, but make sure that's done properly. Proper torque, don't over torque it, don't under torque it. Use an actual torque wrench when you can. Anyway, mark everything so that you know if it moves, and if it does move, you know where to put it back to. Especially if it's a new rifle, clean the bore, run a bore snake through it. Don't just assume the bore is clean. A lot of times there might be stuff in there, so check it, pull it through, make sure there's no grease in there, make sure there's no metal shavings and things like that in there. That can happen on a new rifle. New or old rifle, is a good idea to make sure it's clean, and maybe not a bad idea anyway to pass a bore snake through it. I'm briefly going to mention barrel break-in. If it's a brand new gun, you might want to do that. I like to do it on my rifles. I'm not going to give you an exact formula for that, but you might want to shoot around, clean it, and continue on with the barrel break-in process. It helps if you have a spotter for this, but you don't need one. A lot of times you might not have one. But have a large target, a large sheet of paper. It's worth it to go spend $1.50 on a big piece of cardboard, a big cardboard target, a big, what are those like bright colored construction paper things they have at Walmart that are probably less than $1. Those pay for themselves real quick if you start using a normal size sheet of paper or a tiny target and you can't figure out where your rounds are going. So get a big one. Usually at 50 yards, if you mounted everything properly, the first shot should be somewhere on that paper. Then you got to look at your adjustments and your clicks. Make sure you're adjusting in the right way. And they're marked all different ways on different scopes, and some go clockwise to adjust one way and counterclockwise for another way. Some are half MOA clicks, some are quarter MOA clicks. Know your scope. That's why I said hopefully you have a target with some kind of ring and reference on there. And most of those are going to be denoted at 100 yards or 100 meters, whatever. And realize I'm just going to use 1-inch clicks. They're probably not going to be 1-inch clicks, but just to help you understand this is a good round number. If it's 100 yards is what it's based on, and each click moves me 1 inch at 100 yards, how far is that going to move me at 200 yards? Going to move me twice as much, right? 2 inches. If I cut that in half to 50, it's going to move me half as much, a half an inch. You do this math in your head. I don't want to keep going over it and make it more confusing because it's an audio. But anyway, it's a good idea to mark that target. If you can see the holes in the paper, a little pro tip, get an identical target and sit it next to you on the bench. Then mark it on the target next to you where you hit it so that when you shoot the next one, you can have a point of reference. And every time you shoot, mark it on the target. If you do have to walk up to the target, then make sure you mark your old holes. Nothing's more frustrating than shooting a couple of rounds and going up and be like, was that the last one? Was that the first one? I don't really remember. I thought I would, but now I don't. So have a way to know which rounds you've already fired and which round was the last round that you fired. And do the proper adjustments to get closer to the center of that target until that gun is zeroed for you for that distance. One thing I will encourage you to do is after it's zeroed, get off the bench. Practice shooting, whether it's hunting or tactically. Doesn't really matter if that gun can shoot a half inch, whether it's an AR or a 300 Win Mag, if you've only ever shot off a bench, because you're probably not getting in a gunfight off a bench. You're probably not seeing that public land elk off a bench. Practice shooting with a hasty sling, standing, kneeling, sitting, prone. That's important. It is super important to zero your rifle. It's also important to know how to shoot places other than on a bench. Anyway, with that, I think that's going to be a good rundown on zeroing your weapon, zeroing your rifle, whatever it is. Tactical tip: don't trust the data or the BDC reticle or whatever it is on your scope, on your optic, whatever the book says. You have to test it. If that ballistic reticle is supposed to match up and it's supposed to shoot a certain place at 500 yards, you don't know that it's going to shoot at that place, no matter what anybody says, until you actually do it. If it's a tactical gun, you owe it to yourself to be that proficient. If it's a hunting gun, you owe it to that animal to actually test that before you just randomly throw rounds downrange at 500 yards. Whatever the reticle says, whatever the manufacturer says, lots of things can affect that. Barrel length, just different rifles on different days manufactured, the same model, can produce different velocities on the same ammo. You have to know that. So just because it says if you zero it at this distance, it's going to line up at this, and this distance, in my experience, it's more often that they don't than they actually do. Not everything can be solved by clicking a button on Amazon. I should probably do a whole episode on that. But you can't buy your way out of that. You have to test it and make sure that it's going to shoot at that distance. Don't just assume that if you zero it for this distance, if the book says that I can do 25 clicks at 600 meters, that's going to be what I click and I'm going to be good. You have to test that out for yourself. And that's the tactical tip of the day. Actually test it at the actual distance with the actual ammo you're going to use. The tactical verse of the day I thought of when thinking about this episode: the horse is prepared for the day of battle, but deliverance is of the Lord. Well, victory comes from the Lord. It's up to you to be prepared. It's up to you to be ready. The horse is prepared for the day of battle. The victory is the Lord's. God delivered Noah and the eight. He destroyed the earth in the flood. But he didn't build the ark for Noah. Noah had to build the ark. Noah had to get prepared. Be ready. Be solid. Likewise, you. Be ready. Having a zeroed weapon is part of that.